and said to Jesus, "Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times?" Jesus said to him, "Not 7 times, but I tell you 77 times. For this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. When he began the reckoning, one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. And as he could not pay, his lord ordered him to be sold together with his wife and children and all his possessions, and payment to be made. So the slave fell on his knees before him, saying, 'Have patience with me, and I will pay you everything.' And out of pity for him, the lord of that slave released him and forgave him the debt. But that same slave, as he went out, came upon one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii. And seizing him by the throat, he said, 'Pay what you owe.' Then his fellow slave fell down and pleaded with him, 'Have patience with me, and I will pay you.' But he refused. Then he went and threw him into prison until he would pay the debt. When his fellow slaves saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their lord all that had taken place. Then his lord summoned him and said to him, 'You wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. Should you not have had mercy on your fellow slave as I had mercy on you?' And in anger his lord handed him over to be tortured until he would pay his entire debt. So my heavenly Father will also do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother or sister from your heart." This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. So it's always good to start a sermon out with a quiz. So let's take a Peter quiz this morning. I'm going to mention a Peter, and you either shout out, or I know you 8 o'clock folks aren't shout out kinds of people, but you can think to yourselves what the answer is. First of all, who was Peter Pan? Peter Pan was the guy that didn't want to grow up, right? All right. How about Peter Rabbit? When I Googled Peter Rabbit, it says the world's most beloved bunny. I don't know what Bugs Bunny would think about that. But. Peterbilt. They made trucks, right? Peterbilt. Peter the Great. He was emperor of Russia. Thank you. 1682 to 1721, just in case you didn't know that. The Peter Principle. Managers are promoted to their level of incompetence, right? And the Peter Trap. This is the last one. The Peter Trap. It has nothing to do with plumbing. The Peter Trap. That is when you think there's a limit to how many times you should forgive. Let's move on because I'm getting petered out. Did you know, by the way, that the word Peter, meaning to fizzle out or to diminish, actually comes from the mining industry? Saltpeter is a common name for potassium nitrate. And potassium nitrate is used, it's one of the compounds used in gunpowder, which was used, of course, in the mining industry to make fuses to dynamite rock, right? And of course we know Peter as the rock, and so Peter the rock, saltpeter used with rock, this became known as a dwindling seam of rock or mineral to peter out. There you go. Some meaningless use of knowledge and trivia. All right. It was just recently, of course, that Peter was told by Jesus that he was the rock, and that upon that church, Jesus was going to build the church. Right? So Peter's feeling a little confident, although Jesus also just did tell him that he was Satan-like. But anyway, so Peter asked this question to Jesus, how many times must I forgive? Now before we move on, I want you to remember this word, the Greek word, aphiemi, A-P-H-E-A-M-E-E. It means, it's the Greek word that is used for forgiveness or to forgive. And it literally means to let go. The visual image you would get is a fist that unclenches and drops something. Forgiveness. Okay? Forgiveness is something that all people, all of us, all humans struggle with. Letting go of stuff, not just physical stuff that we surround ourselves with, but all of that stuff that people have done to us over the years. Now, what does the Old Testament teach about forgiveness? Well, the Tanakh, which of course is the entirety of the Hebrew Scriptures, teaches that if the injured party refuses to forgive even when the sinner comes before him 3 times in the presence of others and asks for forgiveness, then he is considered a sinner. So Peter knows that the Old Testament says the limit is 3 times that you forgive. And he knows Jesus is a man of mercy, so he decides to up the ante a little bit, and he says, should I forgive 7 times? Now the number 7 is not a number Peter just picked out of the air. The number 7 was a significant number. It was a number that meant perfection. So Peter thinks, well, I've upped it from 3 to 7, and it's a perfect number. Peter thinks he's really got it. But Jesus doesn't agree. And he says to Peter, not 7 times, but 77 times. Some translations say 70 times 7, but 77 times. So Jesus takes this number, the number 7, the number that means perfection, and he doubles it, which literally means he puts the divine stamp on this number, and it means, he gives it another meaning, which means infinity. There is no limit to our forgiveness. But to make his point, Jesus does what Jesus usually does, and that is he tells a story. He said there was a king, and a man owed the king 10,000 talents. Now, 10,000 talents, what does that mean? Somebody who's really talented? No. It is an amount that was unfathomable to somebody in the first century. It would have been 25 lifetimes of wages for a laborer. 25 lifetimes of wages for a laborer. In other words, who could accumulate that much debt? What could we compare to this amount today? Maybe a lifetime of daily sins, thoughts, words, deeds, since we were young children. Anyway. Now, because the man's debts were so large, he could not repay them. The king decides to sell the man, sell his children, sell his property. What does the man do? He drops to his knees and he begs the king. He says, be patient. Have patience with me and I will pay you everything. That obviously is a promise that the man cannot keep. So what should the king do? There's the ultimate question this morning. The ultimate question. I have 2 stories that help us reflect on what should we do? Certain instances of forgiveness. Samuel Wiesenthal, he was a survivor of the Nazi Holocaust. He tells the story that helps us consider this question. What should I do? What should he do? Wiesenthal was imprisoned in a Nazi concentration camp. One afternoon he was assigned to clean a hospital room. He was asked to go upstairs, actually ordered to go upstairs, to the bed of a young soldier. His head was wrapped. He was obviously dying. He was an SS trooper. The soldier, his name was Carl, he reached out and he grabbed Wiesenthal's hand and he told him that he had to speak to a Jew. He had to confess the terrible things he had done. Otherwise, he could not die in peace. And what had he done? Well, it seems that the group that he was assigned to, they were ordered to place cans of gasoline into a house, and then they marched 200 Jews into that house. They crammed it with all of these people, and they threw grenades into the house, and they were told to shoot anybody who jumps out the window. The young soldier said to Wiesenthal, I shall never forget. He said, it haunts me. And he said, I know what I've told you is terrible. I've longed to talk about it to a Jew and beg forgiveness from him. I know that what I'm asking is too much, but without your answer, I cannot die in peace. And Wiesenthal stood there silently. And then he writes in a book, he recounts the story in a book, The Sunflower. He writes, he stood there for some time, and at last he made up his mind, and he left left the room without saying a word. The book ends with this awful question for every reader: what would you have done? There's the story of Hermann Engel. Engel was a German general in World War II. After the war, he was sentenced by the Nuremberg court to 30 years in prison for the atrocities that his army had committed. He served out his sentence. There's a play called The Black Angel that recounts and sort of dramatizes his life. In the play, Engel, after he has served out his prison time, he's building a cabin in the woods where he and his wife might live out their years in quiet, in hiding, in peace. But there's a journalist by the name of Moreau who knows who this man is, and he's waiting for him. He's waiting for him because Moreau's family had been massacred by Engel's army some 30 years before. And when the court refused to sentence Engel to death, Moreau, well, his hatred grew over those 30 years. And now that he has found Engel, Moreau goes and he stirs up the fanatics in the town that they're going to come at night, burn down that cabin, and shoot Engel and his wife. But Moreau wants to meet Engel first. He wants to fill in some of the gaps of the massacre of the village where his family was murdered. So he goes and he introduces himself to Engel and he talks with him. He sits with him all afternoon one day. And as he talks to him, he realizes that Engel is not the monster that he thought he was. He's just an old, tired man. And as this conversation goes on, Moreau begins to be plagued with doubt. And finally, he tells Engel about the plan of the villagers coming up to destroy their house and to shoot Engel and his wife. And he offers to lead them out through the woods to safety. Engel looks down at the ground and he says, "I'll go on one condition. I'll go if you forgive me." Now, Moreau had murdered Engel in his thoughts for 30 years. But now that Engel, the human being, stands before him, asking him to forgive him, it was more than he could do. So he left the house without saying a word. And the villagers came that night and destroyed the cabin and shot Engel and his wife. What would you have done? Back to the story of the king, Jesus' parable. What would the king do? He looked at the man who owed him 10,000 talents, and he forgave the debt. He freed the man. He freed him to either be forgiving or to be unforgiving. It would be his choice. And as the parable plays out, we see the man is unforgiving. Even though he had been forgiven a debt no one could ever repay, his heart was not changed by the mercy shown to him. He refused to forgive. His heart was not changed. And this gets to the heart of forgiveness. You know, perhaps you've had something done to you, some atrocity, some injury, maybe not to the extent of Weisenthal and Moreau from my stories. And yet we all have had some injury, something done, perpetrated against us, either words or deeds, injuries that we just can't seem to forget, let alone forgive. And it's true for all of us, because as we all know, forgiveness is hard. But if you remember nothing else from my sermon this morning, you have to remember the Peter trap, or the trap that there is a limit to the number of times we are to forgive. You see, the Peter trap is a trap door, and it plummets us into our own anger and hate and bitterness and resentment, which keeps us trapped from a healthy relationship with God. There's a little book written by Lewis Smedes. It's called Forgive and Forget. And he says, this is how human beings forgive and forget. We hurt, we hate, we heal. He says, first we hurt. That is, we allow that injury that's done to us. We don't minimize it. We don't try to sweep it under the rug. But we feel feel the depth of the injury. And then we hate, that is, we place the blame where it needs to be placed, with the person or the people that have hurt us. And then when we are ready, he says, we heal. We let go of the pain that is binding us to the past. This is how human beings forgive. Remember that word aphiemi. It means to let go. And we let go when we forgive. And forgiveness is something we must do because it has nothing to do with the person who has injured you. It has everything to do with our relationship with God and our own healing. One more story from the Holocaust. There's an individual by the name of Corrie ten Boom. She was liberated from a concentration camp just days after the Allied armies conquered Germany. And she took up the seemingly impossible process of forgiveness. And eventually she felt that she found the power of forgiveness to heal. And so she went around preaching forgiveness. Holland and Finland and Germany as well. And one Sunday she was preaching in Munich. And after the service, a man walked up to Corrie and extended his hand. He said, "I'm so glad that Jesus forgives us all our sin, just as you said." And then Corrie recognized who this man was. He was one of the soldiers, one of the guards from the concentration camp she had been held in, who had treated the women so terribly. Corrie remembered, and she froze. And as the man reached out his hand, expecting her to take it, her hand froze at her side. Here she had been preaching forgiveness. And suddenly, when the thought of offering forgiveness in the most challenging way for her, face to face with a guard from her concentration camp, she thought she had overcome the hurt and the hate. She who had preached forgiveness, what would she do? She prayed for Jesus to forgive her, and suddenly she felt forgiven. She felt forgiven for not forgiving, and at that moment her hand went up. She took the hand of her enemy and released him. You see, in her heart, and this is the point, my friends, in her heart she freed him from the terrible past, but she freed herself. Why does Jesus command us to forgive 77 times? Because forgiveness frees us. It is the way that we are set free. We are set free first by God's forgiveness of us. That sets us free to forgive each other. Amen?